Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Raw Life Health Show and Tour Life Ministries. I'm so excited about my guest, Sam Shepard from ValAsta. This astaxanthin product has been blessing so many people, and more people are learning about it and discovering it and getting better from this. But no, you already have a patent on it to treat
Correct.
treat cancer. So what's the new patent about?
In 1992 to 1994, I had two projects in what's called the Artemis project. As a matter of fact, they just named the Artemis, the rocket that's going to the moon, Artemis 1. And that was in recognition that it was the Artemis team in 1992 and 94 that actually started this.
And you were on that team, right?
I was on that team. So we were going to go from Earth to the moon, build laboratories and habitats on the moon, and then build the Mars rocket on the moon to go to Mars. It's part of what's called Lunar Outpost Commission, but Artemis was the code name. So there was a whole group of people. The medical team are the ones that really shot it down in I think it was 1994, where they published that no one could go to Mars because the radiation. Once you get outside the magnetic field of the Earth in what's called the Van Allen belt, the radiation from these things are traveling at the speed of light. So cosmic rays are the ones that scare me the most. They would go right through the spaceship, right into the human being, hit the DNA, totally just mutate the DNA, and if it couldn't be repaired, that cell would die or become cancerous. Well, what we found was that to go to Mars, we had a risk of imminent injury or death had to be less than 3%. Well, the Mars mission as it stands today is greater than 6%. So nobody's going to Mars until we get this resolved. But there were three components. There was the reactor design has to be such, the materials of construction, and then the final one is how do you stop the inflammatory disease that the astronauts are going to get from radiation exposure? Well, ValAsta does that. ValAsta neutralizes those hydroxyl free radicals that when radiation comes in and hits a water molecule, which we're 80% water, when it hits that water molecule fractures into a free radical, a hydroxyl free radical. Every moment you're out in space, you're generating more and more of these free radicals until finally you end up with radiation sickness, inflammatory disease, cancer. And in about 2 months of the 9 months to 1 year journey to Mars, everybody would be dead. Nobody will make it. So we knew this in 1994. So I filed for a patent a couple of years ago as a way of mitigating and solving that one leg of the three-legged stool. How do you protect the astronaut from inflammatory disease? Now, on the space station, we see them getting exposed. In the Apollo missions, we saw tremendous exposure also. But on the space station, they have a hardened chamber that they can get into. So when they see a solar event flare from the sun, they can escape into that pod, and it's built, I'm not sure what the material is, but aluminum and carbon borate is another material. There's some composites of carbon that can absorb radiation without spatter. And what that means is when this particle comes zooming in at the speed of light, if it hits aluminum, it'll go make a small hole on the inside. On the outside, aluminum particles will fly off like a shotgun blast. And these are very, very small particles. But now you've got the astronaut standing here. He gets splattered with these aluminum particles traveling close to the speed of light. And they can cause tremendous tissue damage all throughout the body. So nobody would survive right now a trip to Mars. It takes a year to get there. They'd spend a year on the surface and a year to get home. Nobody's coming home.
What was the actual patent for?
The patent was the use of ValAsta for the remediation of radiation. When somebody here is exposed to, say, radiation treatments for cancer, It's a very narrow beam. It's highly focused. It's very regional. But when somebody is on ValAsta, any of those free radicals that are generated from that radiation are immediately neutralized. The radiation goes in to disrupt, just like a bullet, to disrupt the DNA of the cancer and kill the cancer. But it invariably will hit water molecules and cause a huge inflammatory response, a burn, similar to what we saw in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So we need to stop that inflammation. Well, ValAsta mitigates that tremendously. We have several people who had radiation treatments and they healed very, very quickly.
From the radiation treatment, but will the ValAsta negate the reason why they're doing the radiation to begin with? Meaning, if somebody's doing chemo radiation, should they not take ValAsta while they're doing it? Or
but it's not the inflammatory response from radiation that kills the cancer. It's the actual bullet hitting the DNA of the cancer, disrupting its DNA, and it can't survive. So it shuts down, but it creates a huge amount of these hydroxyl free radicals that they have to go somewhere. So they permeate all through your body, and that's what adds to the radiation sickness that you would get, or the regional burns that people get, like sunburns, but radiation burns. We have several people who have been taking it for quite a while. So that really supports the whole premise.
Well, if they get diagnosed with cancer, they say they need radiation, they're taking ValAsta. Is it useless to do the radiation if they're on ValAsta? I understand you think it's not healthy to do the radiation, and it's not. But
yeah,
besides the negative effects of the radiation, I mean, does it also completely wipe out any part of the radiation that's doing anything to the body?
No, the radiation is instantaneous. You go in, get zapped, it's over. You either killed the cancer or you didn't. There's no lingering chemical reaction that the radiation's doing at that point. It is an instantaneous speed of light attack on the DNA of the cancer. But in the process of doing that, there's residual damage. There's a generation of these free radicals that is a casualty or a consequence of the radiation treatment. It has nothing to do with fighting cancer. As a matter of fact, those free radicals, if they're not mitigated, are going to result in cancer. So that's what the ValAsta then comes in and neutralizes that detrimental effect caused by the radiation.
That makes sense. Okay, so people that are doing, I mean, it's great preventatively, it's great for people with cancer in general, but people that are going to chemo and radiation, they should definitely be taking the ValAsta.
Correct. I've got several NIH papers now on pancreatic cancer, which is, as you know, a very difficult one. There's a research paper showing the effects of using a chemo treatment called gemcitabine with and without astaxanthin. And they got a huge bump in stopping the progression of pancreatic cancer by using the combination of the two. They're two separate pathways, but it's difficult for any enemy that you're attacking. It's difficult to fight off of two fronts. So when you do chemo, and there's some real downsides, obviously, to that with the free radical generation, it's a different pathway for the ValAsta. So the cancer cell is getting attacked from two different fronts. And it's hard for the cancer cell. So what we are seeing now in these binary treatments, that 1 + 1 = 3. We get an accelerated benefit by doing chemo and ValAsta, much greater than just doing chemo alone. The same thing with radiation.
What about then doing just ValAsta alone? Is it better?
Yeah. If you do the ValAsta, a lot of these cases are late term cases. ValAsta is a great. It kills by two methods. One is it inhibits the PD-L1 if you're PD-L1 positive. Some cancers are not PD-L1 positive. but we were still getting kills. And we were trying to figure out, and that's how we figured out the glucosidic. We could enter the cancer cell and kill it from within. So we have two mechanisms with ValAsta. We still, it doesn't kill or cure the cancer in 100% of the cases. So that's something that we want to be very clear about. There's some tough cases where the person's immune system is severely depressed and there's not enough immune T cells there to actually aid what's going on with the ValAsta. So we have to have both in place. The ValAsta is very, very good at stopping the progression of those cancers. And we see it with cancer antigen numbers, the CA numbers, they peak and then they start back down again. Melanomas, basal cell,
Is
lung
there a list
cancer.
on your website of those cancers?
Yeah, there's a whole list of them there that we are currently, I'm pretty sure they're there. If not, in some of the NIH reports that are under the research section on the website, you'll be able to see that the cancers.
It helps even all cancers, even if it's not those, but those specifically is where it's most powerful. And when you say basal cell, you mean skin cancer?
Skin cancer, melanoma. Melanoma is the scariest one because by the time you see it on your skin, there's a good chance it's already metastatic somewhere else in your body. Basal cell is a little more forgiving. It usually stays on the dermis or the epidermis of the skin, and it can be treated. Squamous cell is another one that will show up on the skin. That one's very well treated. Melanoma is one of the very first ones that we totally eradicated in 30 days off of a young lady that's 39 years old. She had it, by the time she went to the doctor, she had a lesion and she had a tumor in her brain and tumors in her colon. And it was all melanoma. So she was stage 4 and the prognosis was not good. And so we ended up giving it to her. That was the one that really got my attention. That was pretty dramatic. And the doctor at MD Anderson and her actually sent me a text waving at me that he really didn't have an explanation. He called it a natural remission.
Wow, how much ValAsta was she on?
We were giving her at that time probably 120 milligrams a day. And we were still working out the dosing issues at that point. That was in, would have been in 2017, I guess, 2018 timeframe.
And you yourself had cancer and used the ValAsta to help yourself get better.
Correct. I had a bone cancer called polycythemia vera. There was nothing. Only about 15,000 people had it when I had it. So there was no research, no pharmaceutical companies had done research on it. There was no treatment. The only way to keep me alive was to bleed me. I had to be bled every month. Did that for 4 years and that got old. And that's when I went out and found the 5 animals that don't get cancer and found out this common molecule existed across those species. I found out where it came from an algae called Hematococcus pluvialis. And I began eating the algae. And my phlebotomies at 4 milligrams got pushed out to once every 2 months. At 12 milligrams got pushed out to once every 4 months. And then I started taking 100 milligrams because I had no side effects. My liver and blood work was perfectly normal. And at 100 milligrams, my phlebotomies ended. I started in 2003. I had a 10-year, 97% of the people with that cancer perished within 10 years. And in 2015, I was declared cancer-free.
Well,
so that's what got my attention. It was 8 years of research as to why in the world was this working. I was in as skeptical as anyone else, but that's just the world that I grew up in, was to be skeptical.
Well, you're even worse in my situation. I want to give it to my family. They don't want to take it. It's just, and they have cancer and they don't get it.
I have I have family members right now who just got diagnosed with melanoma, and she won't take it. I don't know what's going through their mind. There's no downside.
The doctors are convincing them to stay away. Well, so I want to encourage everybody to get the ValAsta, and I want to tell you, ValAsta is astaxanthin, but with a special process to it. And it makes it more absorbable in the body. And I've had other shows with Sam Shepard to discuss that process, but there's nothing like it on the market. So don't be fooled and just take astaxanthin. You need to take the ValAsta. Well, everybody, I apologize for my hiccups, but I'm so glad we got this information in because it's so important. And I'm going to go get some water. Sam, thank you for your time. And a lot of people have a lot of questions. There's a frequently asked questions page now where you can answer your questions, but will you come on the show and do a live Q&A with us sometime?
Sure. I'd love to do that, to get people to call in. This is not on the people that are sick. They're relying totally on their doctors to be upfront, unbiased, and have their best welfare in mind. What we find in reality is that is not the case. Give them as much information as we possibly can so that they can go in. For example, when an oncologist looks at a PET scan and sees this big mass there, he immediately assumes it's cancer. Well, they're not telling you, but they can't differentiate between inflammation and cancer off of a PET scan, a CT scan, or an MRI. They cannot differentiate. So they just assume that it's cancer when in fact it's probably statistically an inflammatory response. They're going to give you chemo, make you very, very sick.
Isn't that the reason why they go and do a biopsy to confirm if it is or isn't?
That's correct. But in some cancers, all they do is go off of the PET scan. And biopsy is probably the best way of trying to determine by looking at the cells. In some cases, we put people on ValAsta. They go in for a scan. They're feeling great. They're now gaining weight, which for the last 8 months, they've been losing weight. All of a sudden, it turns around. They're gaining weight. They feel fine. They go in and get a CAT scan with contrast, and the tumor's grown. The doctor freaks, says, oh, my golly, it's getting worse. Turns out it's not. That's your immune system putting pus around the cancer cell to dissolve the dead necrotic cancer cells.
But that's not always the case. So is there a way to know if it's the good that the body's doing that, or if it's bad and it is getting worse? Is there a way to tell the difference?
There is. There's blood work. So you have to combine that with the CA numbers, the cancer antigen numbers that they get with your blood work. So you can have a CA19, CA15, CA125, depending on the type of cancer you have. One of the best ones is the embryonic antigen, the CEA, and that's a pretty good one, but it can also be elevated strictly from an inflammatory issue somewhere in your body. You can get an elevated CEA from prostatitis, where your prostate's infected. No cancer, but it's just swollen. Urinary tract infections can give you a high CEA.
Now, it's not good if it's swollen, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's cancer.
That's right. Yes, statistically, when cancer is very rare, believe it or not, it's not. There's more inflammatory diseases that show up on scans that are not cancerous than those that are. Thank goodness.
Well, I would say the inflammation is a great warning sign of the body. You better change something, or it will turn into cancer.
That's exactly right. If you're C-reactive protein, it's got to be less than 3 milligrams per liter, and make sure that those units are right, because some labs are reporting them as milligrams per deciliter, DL. If it is milligrams per deciliter, you have to multiply that number by 10.
Yes,
so
I was talking about that, because that's another frequently asked question I want you to have. added to your website, because that's really confusing and important. So if you can add to your frequently asked questions the difference between the two, so when people get their report, they know the difference, because some people have told me, oh, mine reads 0.002, so it's under 2.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, what kind is it? Because maybe not, so what you were just explaining is some laboratories measure it different than others, right?
I had one case where a lab result came in at 1.5, and she was elated and didn't understand why she was still having joint pain and arthritis. And I asked her, I said, you got to give me the units. What's the units? Well, the units were milligrams per deciliter, which meant I had to multiply the 1.5 times 10. Her CRP was 15.
Even though it said 1.5.
Even though it said it was 1.5 milligrams per deciliter.
But what is that when they read it? The milligrams per deciliter, what does it say? It says like 1.5 what, ml or something?
mg/dl.
mg/dl. So
Right.
like something like that, you times it by 10.
You multiply it by 10 because we are focused on milligrams per liter, not a tenth of a liter, a liter.
And so how would it look if it was read as per liter? How would it look? 1.5
mg/L.
mg/L, as opposed to the other one, which was what?
mg/dl.
Okay, and the DL is the one you multiply. So if it's MDL,
That's correct.
then it should be below 2, below 1. That would be
It should be less than 3. So it's very important that we get those numbers understood.
Sam, thank you for your time with this information. It's so important.